We're incredibly lucky this month to have this fantastic picture all the way from the National Gallery of Art, Washington. It's one of the greatest paintings by Thomas Gainsborough, painted towards the end of his career, and it shows a very beautiful lady called Mrs. Richard Brinsley Sheridan. Now, her real name is Elizabeth Linley, and that is the connection with Dulwich. Elizabeth Linley was one of the greatest singers in the 18th century, and we happen to have the Linley bequest, where we have about 5 to 7 paintings of the family, and among them one of the great Gainsboroughs of this collection, the Linley sisters, where Elizabeth is shown standing next to Mary, who is sitting, both great singers. What we see here, however, is Elizabeth much later on, a good 11 years later, and things have changed quite dramatically for her. At the age of 18, when she was living in Bath and was leading her famous career as a singer, particularly of oratorio, she eloped with Richard Brinsley Sheridan to France to get married. Although the marriage was never fully official, they did marry on their return in England. And Sheridan was, although he was extremely successful as a playwright, was quite cruel to her. He didn't actually allow her to carry on with her singing career, which meant that she had to help him, but it also meant that she would maybe sing in private, but her on-stage career had come to a complete end. And you can sort of perhaps feel that to a certain extent in this picture, because what we see is her sitting in this very beautiful landscape, looking rather melancholically out at us. There's a sense of sort of almost sadness in her eyes in the way she looks at you. Gainsborough painted her several times. He was one very friendly with the family, the Linleys. He painted the father, the sons, and the sisters. But he seems to have been particularly fond of her, and I think he probably saw her as a muse, just because she's so beautiful. And also, we know he loved her voice. There is a report when he'd just come back from a concert, he couldn't resist but get a piece of clay and make a model of her and actually paint it with oil paint, as if he just had to create something out of anything to try and keep her with him. So there was definitely something very strong, a strong connection between them. But as I said, here we see her much later, when she had left London to live in the countryside, because unfortunately Sheridan wasn't a particularly good husband. He went off with many other ladies, and she eventually had her own affair with a lieutenant from the Irish Army, somebody called Fitzgerald, and here she is in her country repose. What's interesting is that the National Gallery of Art recently made some X-rays of this picture, and what we see is actually quite a different picture. She's still sitting down, but she's holding a basket, and she seems to be posing as a sort of shepherdess. And it looks as if Gainsborough wanted her to be, in a way, a personification of let's say, innocence, the shepherdess in the countryside. But luckily, he decided to change that. And actually, you can see the changes. You can see that the knee was originally much higher. With the naked eye, you can actually see that there's a similar kind of pink just around here. But he decides to bring her legs right down and create this fantastic diagonal straight through the composition, so that you start with these very dainty little feet into this beautifully painted silk dress, along through her scarf, and focus on this rather highly finished portrait of her as she looks out at you. The landscape is part of the beauty of this picture, because it's done very quickly, very loosely, the brushstroke, particularly to the left, but there's this sort of wonderful light. It's almost sort of proto-romantic as he paints his sitter. Gainsborough loved painters like Velázquez, for example, or Titian, and here we have, in a way, him fusing these two great painters into one. The landscape owes a lot to Titian. The National Gallery has The Death of Actaeon, a late painting by Titian that Gainsborough no doubt knew, and it's very evocative in this landscape. But he also knew Velázquez very well, and you can see that, particularly the painting of the drapery, the idea that when you get close it looks very disparate, very loose, but as soon as you take a step back, the whole painting comes together again. And the great thing about having this picture here is that it is on a very long perspective, on the enfilade. So you see her from afar, and It's a wonderful sensation of seeing her sitting there, looking out at you. I've never seen a portrait like this work so well in this gallery.